Welcome to Audiobooks. Immerse yourself in the world of stories, ideas, and knowledge, all through the power of audio.
Book title: The Door in the Wall by H.G. Wells. Chapter 1: The Confession of Wallace. It was on a quiet London evening, the sort of evening when the lamps glow softly through mist and the rumble of carriages feels muted, that Lionel Wallace told me his secret. We had been friends since our school days, though our paths had diverged. I had chosen the steady pursuit of letters, the careful craft of words and reflection. Wallace, on the other hand, had stepped into the world of politics with the confidence and charisma that seemed destined to carry him far. And indeed it had. By then he was a rising star, admired in the House and well regarded in the public eye. Yet that night, over the glow of a half-forgotten fire, he looked not triumphant but troubled. His face, always marked with that curious blend of boyish charm and statesman's resolve, carried a shadow of longing. It was as though he bore a burden invisible to others but unbearably heavy to himself. "Redmond," he said, my name spoken in a voice quieter than usual, as though fearful that the walls themselves might overhear. "There is something I have never told anyone, something I have carried with me all my life. It has shaped me, haunted me, and perhaps ruined me. If you were anyone else, I should not dare to speak, but I cannot keep it to myself any longer. I must tell someone who will listen." I said nothing at first. I had seen that look in men before, the look of one about to confess not a crime, but a truth too strange for common ears. So I leaned back, waiting, and after a pause he went on. "It is about a door," Wallace said slowly, as though testing the words. "A green door in a white wall. A door I once passed through when I was a child. What lay beyond it was paradise. At least it felt so then, more real than life itself. And yet—" He broke off, a faint tremor passing across his lips. "And yet, Redmond, I have spent the years since chasing the memory of that place, always hoping to find the door again, never certain if I dreamt it." He stopped, and for a moment only the fire crackled between us. I studied him in the half-light, a man admired, accomplished, even envied. Yet here he sat, speaking with the yearning of a boy who had glimpsed something too wonderful for this world. "You mean," I asked cautiously, "a real door? Not a dream? Not some childish fancy?" Wallace's eyes met mine, sharp and earnest. "I swear to you it was real as this room, as real as you, sitting there before me. And I tell you, Redmond, it has haunted me every day of my life. In my triumphs, in my disappointments, it has lingered at the edge of thought. Sometimes I have seen it again, seen the very door in unexpected places. And yet I never dared or never managed to enter it again." He leaned forward now, his hands clasped, the firelight striking his face so that he seemed at once young and terribly old. "I am a successful man, am I not? A man others point to as fortunate, even great. But if you ask me what matters most in all my life, I will tell you it was the moment I found that door and what I saw beyond it. That is my truth, Redmond. That is my confession." His voice sank into silence. For a long time neither of us spoke. I caught between curiosity and doubt, he staring into the fire, lost in some vision beyond my reach. And so it began, the strange, sorrowful tale of Lionel Wallace and the door in the wall. Chapter 2: The White Wall and Green Door. Wallace's voice grew steadier as he spoke, though his eyes still held that faraway look, as if the very act of telling me drew him back into his boyhood. "I was barely 5 years old," he began, "a lonely little boy wandering the gray streets of West Kensington. My father, as you know, was a stern and busy man. He had little patience for a child's fancies, and I was left much to myself. A nursemaid was supposed to keep me in tow, but that day she had gone off with a friend. I remember the sunlight slanting down, warm and dusty, the pavement beneath my shoes, and the endless rows of dull houses. I strayed further than I ever had before. And then I saw it. A wall, high and white, smooth as plaster, stretching along the street. It seemed to have no windows, no breaks, only that endless expanse of pale surface. And in the wall, half hidden by the shadows of overhanging trees, was a door painted green. He paused, his hand tightening on the arm of his chair as though the memory was something physical, something he could almost touch. It was not like other doors. It drew me. The green was brighter than the leaves, brighter than the sky. It seemed to call me, though it was utterly still, and I, a child who had never known kindness save in brief, fleeting moments, felt certain, absolutely certain, that behind that door waited something meant for me. His voice dropped to a hush, and I found myself leaning forward to catch every word. I remember standing before it, my heart racing. I pressed my hand against the wood. It was cool, and yet there seemed to be life in it, like the skin of something breathing. I hesitated, though I cannot tell why. Perhaps because it felt forbidden, too marvelous to be true. But the pull was stronger than my fear. With a trembling hand, I pushed it open. Wallace's gaze flickered toward me then, as though testing whether I could believe him. I gave no sign, only listened. The moment I stepped through, the world changed. The street, the noise, the dust, all vanished. I was in a garden. He shut his eyes briefly, as though seeing it all over again. It was the most beautiful garden I have ever known. The air was soft, golden, like sunlight made into mist. Flowers glowed with colors I have never seen since, deep blues and scarlets that seemed to sing rather than simply shine. There were fountains, their waters sparkling as though touched with stars. And there were people, gentle figures, who looked upon me with such kindness that I felt, for the first time in my life, at home. No one scolded, no one hurried me along. They smiled, they welcomed me, as though I belonged. His voice faltered, weighted with emotion. I cannot explain to you, Redmond, what that welcome meant to a lonely child. It was as though I had stepped into a place that had been waiting for me all along, a paradise hidden behind a common wall. The fire hissed softly in the grate, filling the pause that followed. Wallace sat very still, his gaze fixed on the glowing coals. That, he said finally, was my first sight of the door in the wall. And Redmond, it changed everything. For though I left it soon after, though I was cast back into the world, I have never forgotten the promise of what lay beyond that green door.
Chapter 3. The Garden of Enchantment. Wallace's voice softened as he leaned back, his eyes distant, his thoughts clearly not in that London room with me, but still wandering in the vision of his childhood. The garden, he said slowly, was not like any garden I have ever seen since. It was not simply beautiful, it was enchanted. Every flower, every blade of grass, every shaft of light seemed alive with meaning. It was as though the very air rejoiced in my presence, as though the place had been waiting for me to arrive. I remember a long lawn, green and tender, where soft winds stirred the petals of blossoms so bright they seemed lit from within. The air was filled with fragrance, sweet, delicate, yet utterly strange, unlike any scent in the ordinary world. There were great trees, tall and ancient, but not stern. Their branches spread wide as if to shelter me, and their leaves whispered a song that was not quite wind, not quite words, but something between the two. Wallace paused, his lips curling in the faintest smile. And there were people. Not many, only a few,
but they were unlike anyone I had known in my childhood. They were kind, utterly kind. Their faces glowed with warmth, and in their eyes was no impatience, no scorn. They did not rush me, did not hush me, did not treat me as a nuisance. Instead, they welcomed me, as though I were expected, as though I were one of their own. A woman bent down to greet me, and her voice was like music. She led me by the hand, and together we walked along winding paths, lined with blossoms. And then I saw children. Children playing, laughing, their games light and merry. They did not mock me, as others had done. They called me to join them, and I did with such happiness as I cannot describe. It was as if the loneliness I had carried all my life melted away in that instant. For a moment, he fell silent, lost in the glow of memory. The fire in the grate cast its shifting light across his face, and I thought how curious it was that a man so successful, so admired, could be moved almost to tears by the recollection of a childhood vision. Everything in that garden was gentle, Wallace continued at last. Gentle, yet wonderful. The colors seemed richer than earthly colors, the sounds clearer, purer. Even silence itself was not emptiness, but a kind of harmony. I wandered among fountains that sang with crystal voices. I touched flowers that folded at my fingers as though alive. I looked up and saw the sky. No, not the sky, but something brighter, deeper, more radiant than our own. And through it all was the certainty, the deep, unshakable certainty, that I belonged there, that this garden was mine as much as theirs, that I had found a home I never knew I lacked until that moment. His voice dropped into a whisper, barely audible. It was happiness, Redmond. Pure happiness. The kind a child dreams of, but grown men rarely taste. And though the years have carried me far from that place, though I have walked the halls of power and tasted the bitterness of ambition, nothing has ever equaled the joy of that garden. Wallace sighed, and for a moment the room seemed smaller, dimmer, as if the memory itself had drawn all the light into its heart. That was my first hour in paradise, an hour that has haunted me all my life.
Chapter 4. The Girl with the Book. Wallace's voice grew hushed again, tinged with wonder, as though what he was about to describe was the most extraordinary moment of all. After playing with the children, he said, I wandered deeper into the garden. My little companions seemed to understand without words that I wished to explore, and they let me go, smiling as though they knew what awaited me. I followed a shaded path lined with roses, and at the end of it stood a girl, older than I, perhaps 10 or 11, seated upon a low stone bench. In her hands was a book. It was no ordinary book. The cover itself seemed alive, gleaming with colors that shifted in the light, as though woven from threads of sunlight and shadow. She looked up at me, and her eyes— how shall I describe them? They were kind, yes, but filled with a knowledge beyond her years. She beckoned me closer, and I obeyed, my heart beating fast. Come, she said softly. Look. She opened the book, and what I saw upon its pages has never faded from my memory. It was no words and pictures, as in a child's primer. No, the pages moved. They breathed. At first I thought it some sort of painted scene, but then the figures stirred. The trees in the pictures swayed with real winds. The rivers flowed. Men and women walked across the page as though it were a window to another world. The stories did not need to be read. They unfolded themselves before my eyes. I saw great adventures, ships tossed upon stormy seas, explorers wandering into unknown lands, kings and queens ruling distant kingdoms.
I saw strange beasts, wondrous machines, towering cities, all things beyond the reach of my childish imagination. Each page revealed another marvel, and I was transfixed, unable to look away. But it was more than that. The book seemed to know me. Its stories were not random, they spoke to my secret wishes, my fears, my longings. One page showed a lonely child finding friendship. Another revealed a boy rising to greatness. It was as though the book itself reached into my soul and mirrored it back to me. The girl turned the pages slowly, watching my face with quiet satisfaction. She did not speak again. She only smiled, as though she knew this moment was meant to change me. And I, a little boy starved for wonder, drank in every image, every shifting scene until I lost all sense of time. Wallace's expression darkened then, the memory clouded with sorrow. But paradise, it seems, does not allow a child to stay forever. Just as I leaned closer, eager for the next vision, the garden trembled, the light dimmed. I felt the air grow cooler, and then his voice caught. I was outside again, standing in the street. The white wall behind me, the green door closed, no garden, no girl, only the dull gray pavement beneath my shoes. He pressed a hand to his forehead, as if the return still pained him. I cried, Redmond. I cried as I had never cried before, for I knew that I had lost something precious, something more real than all the world outside that door. And though I searched, though I wandered those streets again and again in the days that followed, the door was gone. I could not find it. His voice sank into silence, the firelight flickering across his weary face. That was my first loss. The loss I have carried with me ever since.
Chapter 5. The Return to Reality. Wallace drew a long breath before continuing, and the sound carried the weight of a man reliving an old grief. Redmond, he said, the world I returned to that day was crueler than I had ever known it before. For once I had seen the garden, once I had felt its warmth and kindness, the streets of London seemed unbearable. The houses stood like walls of prison stone. The air was heavy with smoke. Even the sunlight seemed cold. Everything I touched felt lifeless. I remember walking back home, my shoes clattering on the hard pavement, and wondering if perhaps I had only dreamed it. But no dream had ever been so vivid. No dream had ever filled me with such joy. I knew I had been there. The ache in my heart told me so. I longed to go back, to find the green door, to push it open again. But when I turned to look, the wall was bare, unbroken, blank. The door was gone. He shifted in his chair, staring into the fire as if it too might vanish at any moment. For days afterward I searched. I slipped away from my nursemaid, from the household, wandering streets I should never have entered, hoping to stumble across that white wall again, but it was useless. I traced the roads, the alleys, every turn I thought I remembered, yet the door had vanished as if it had never been. Once, in desperation, I tried knocking on the plain white wall where I believed it had been. Only stone answered me. My hand came away bruised, my heart broken. When at last I returned home, I tried to speak of it to my father. I told him about the wall, the green door, the garden, the people. He silenced me at once, called it nonsense, said I had invented it. He threatened punishment if I wasted my time with such fantasies. To him, the world was a place of rules, duty, and discipline. There was no room for wonder. And so I learned to keep silent. Wallace leaned forward, his voice thick with quiet bitterness. But silence does not mean forgetting. Oh no, I remembered. Every day I remembered. My lessons seemed dull, my tutor stern and tiresome, my companions unkind. What joy could I find in Latin declensions, in the rote recitation of facts, when I had glimpsed a place where learning was alive, where stories unfolded in living pictures, where kindness ruled over all? What happiness could there be in dames where children jeered and shoved, when I had played in the garden with friends who never mocked? The world outside that door was gray, Redmond, gray and hard,
and the more I grew, the more I felt it. I lived in comfort, yes, in privilege even, but without warmth, without belonging. The one memory of joy I carried was the garden, and it seemed farther and farther away with each passing year. His face was grave, his eyes shadowed with sorrow. You see, my life since then has been a pursuit of that door, or rather of the happiness it promised. I sought it in friendships, in ambition, and success, but never again in quite the same way. Always there has been something missing, something the world could not give. For once one has seen paradise, how can one be content with pavements and smoke? The fire sputtered softly, filling the silence that followed. Wallace's words hung in the room like smoke themselves, impossible to brush away. That, he said at last, was the return to reality. The moment I learned that joy can be taken in an instant, and that the world will give nothing in its place.
Chapter 6: The Growing Obsession. Wallace's voice grew more restless now, as though the memory stirred a conflict still unresolved in his soul. As I grew older, he said, the door never left me. I did not see it again at once, but I dreamed of it. Oh, how I dreamed of it. I would wake in the night, certain that, if only I could slip from my bed and walk through the sleeping city, I might find it waiting for me, half hidden in the shadows, patient and unchanged. Years passed. My school days began, hard and joyless. I buried myself in studies, in the endless grind of lessons and examinations, but the memory of the garden was like a flame that would not be smothered. Often, in the midst of dull recitations, I would see it in my mind, the green door, the golden light, the kind faces. I felt as though some part of me remained behind that wall, forever out of reach. He paused, his eyes narrowing as if he could see the moments flickering past him. And then, one day, it returned. I was 17, walking across Kensington with a group of school companions, when suddenly, on a narrow street, there it was, the white wall, the green door, as vivid, as real as when I was a child. My heart leapt. I longed to break away from the others, to seize the handle and push it open once more. I felt that if I did, the garden would still be there, unchanged, waiting for me. But Wallace's lips tightened, his hand trembling faintly on the arm of his chair. But I did not. I feared my companions would see, would laugh, would think me mad. And so I walked on. I walked on, Redmond, though every step tore at my soul. That night, I lay awake, furious with myself. Why had I not gone in? Why had I chosen fear of ridicule over the chance to recover paradise? I told myself I would find it again, but days, weeks, months went by, and I did not. The door had vanished. The firelight cast shadows across Wallace's face, deepening the lines of regret etched there. And so it grew into an obsession. I began to dread seeing the door, lest I fail it again. I began to hope for it too, praying for just one more chance. My heart lived in constant turmoil, caught between ambition and wonder, between the life I was building and the life I had once touched. That, Redmond, has been the struggle of my years, every triumph tainted by the thought that somewhere a door stood waiting, and I had not the courage to enter. He fell silent, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the quiet room.
Chapter 7: Success and Regret. Wallace leaned back in his chair, his eyes shadowed, the glow of the fire touching his face, but not warming it. "You know my career, Redmond," he began quietly. "You have watched me rise, first in the debating halls at Oxford, then in the House of Commons, where men said my words carried fire and persuasion. You know the honors that have followed, the trust that has been placed in me. To the world, I have been a man of success, respected, admired, even envied. But what does it all mean when weighed against what I lost? At times, yes, I was proud. when I first spoke in Parliament and felt the hush fall over the chamber, when I saw the effect my arguments had, when I realized the influence I held over men's minds. There was triumph in that. And yet, in the very heart of triumph, a whisper rose. What use is all this when once you knew the garden? You see, Redmond, worldly ambition is a jealous master. It demands everything: time, energy, devotion. And I gave it. I gave my youth, my strength, my heart, all in pursuit of reputation and position. I told myself that this was the path to greatness, that this would make my life worthwhile. But in truth, I was bargaining against myself. For even as I spoke with confidence to the world, I felt inside me a hollow place that no applause could fill. I would stand at the height of some success and suddenly remember the softness of the garden air, the voices that welcomed me, the book whose pages lived and breathed. I would feel, as sharp as grief, that I had exchanged paradise for ambition, that all the honors of this world were only dust compared to that lost wonder. He fell silent for a moment, his gaze drifting toward the fire, as though he saw in its restless flames the flicker of the green door. There were times, he went on, when I caught sight of it again, not often, but enough to torment me. Once when I was late for a division in the house, rushing down a side street, I saw it. The white wall, the green door. So near, Redmond. So close I could have reached out and touched it. And what did I do? I hurried past. I told myself duty called me, that I must not be distracted, that my place was in the chamber, not beyond that door. That day I made a brilliant speech. Men praised me, newspapers lauded me, but all the while in the secret places of my heart, I knew I had chosen wrong. It was always like that. The world offered me position, and I grasped it with both hands. The door offered me wonder, and I turned away. And yet the thought of what lay beyond it has never left me. Every triumph has been poisoned with regret, every success a reminder of the happiness I abandoned. Wallace pressed his hands together, his expression taut with anguish. So you see, Redmond, I am not the fortunate man people think me. To them, I am an example of ambition fulfilled, of talent rewarded. But in truth, I am a man who has betrayed himself, again and again. For all I have achieved, I would give it gladly, if only I could return once more to the garden beyond the green door. The fire snapped loudly then, startling me, as though to punctuate his words with its own judgment. Wallace did not stir. He remained motionless, his gaze locked on the flames, and his face etched with the sorrow of a man who had gained the world and lost the thing he valued most.
Chapter 8. The Last Sight of the Door. Wallace's voice lowered, heavy with the weight of memory, and I felt the hush of the room deepen, as though even the fire dared not interrupt him. "It was not long ago," he said, "the last time I saw it. Perhaps that is why I cannot rid myself of the thought of it, why I feel its pull so strongly now. I was returning late from a long day in the house. The evening was damp, the air thick with fog, and I was weary in body and spirit. I had given myself, as always, to speeches, to committees, to the endless machinery of politics, and I felt drained like a man hollowed out by his own ambition. And then, suddenly, it was there. I had turned a corner in a quiet street, and out of the mist rose the white wall. The green door shone faintly, almost luminous in the dimness, as if it carried its own light. I stopped dead in my tracks. For a moment, I thought I had conjured it from longing. But no, it was real, as solid as the pavement beneath my feet. My heart pounded. I knew that if I opened it, the garden would be waiting for me as it had all those years ago. The air would be golden, the flowers radiant, the gentle faces smiling. For an instant, Redmond, I was no longer a weary politician.
I was a lonely child again, trembling with wonder before the promise of joy. I longed, oh, how I longed to turn the handle. But then came the chains of duty, of habit, of fear. I thought of the people waiting for me. I thought of my reputation, of the committees I served, of the great work that was expected of me. And beneath it all, I felt the hesitation that had undone me so many times before. What if the door was not what I remembered? What if it was nothing but a trick of the mind, an illusion, a delusion? What if I entered and found nothing? I stood there, trembling, torn in two. On one side, the gray world of duty, of success, of responsibility. On the other, the green door, with its promise of wonder. I do not know how long I hesitated, but in the end, I turned away. I walked on, though my legs felt heavy as lead, though every step was an act of betrayal. The mist swallowed the wall, and the door was gone. That night, I could not sleep. I lay awake, asking myself whether I had thrown away my last chance. I tried to console myself. I told myself I had chosen wisely, that my work was real, while the garden was only a dream. But no matter how I reasoned, my heart knew the truth. I had turned away from the thing that mattered most. Wallace's voice faltered. He clasped his hands together, his gaze fixed on the fire, but I could see his fingers trembling. I cannot tell you, Redmond, how that moment has haunted me. Since then, the memory has pursued me like a ghost. I see the green door in my mind whenever I close my eyes. I hear its silent invitation in every pause of my day. I know now that my life has been a series of betrayals, and perhaps I have betrayed myself for the last time. If the door comes again, I fear I shall not be able to resist it. He fell silent, his face pale, his eyes burning with a strange, unearthly longing. And for the first time that night, I felt a shiver, not only of pity, but of dread.
Chapter 9. Redmond's Reflection. When Wallace's tale was finished, silence fell between us. The fire crackled in the grate, casting shifting shadows across the room, but neither of us spoke for some time. Wallace sat staring into the flames, his face drawn and weary, while I found myself unable to decide whether I had listened to a confession of profound truth or a tapestry of self-deception. I will admit it, dear listener, I was shaken. There had been in Wallace's voice a sincerity that no actor could feign. The longing in his eyes, the tremor in his words, the haunted weight of his causes, all of it spoke of a man not fabricating, but reliving. And yet, even as I felt the pull of his story, another part of me clung to skepticism. Was it possible, I asked myself, that this green door was but the symbol of some inward desire? That the garden he described was not a place in the world, but a dream conjured by a lonely child's imagination, one that had grown in power as it haunted him through the years? The rational side of my mind told me so. It insisted that Wallace's visions were nothing but fantasies, magnified by the strain of politics and ambition until they became indistinguishable from reality. Such things happen to men of sensitive temperament. Imagination can weave a spell that rivals truth. And yet, there remained the other part of me, the part that resisted cold logic. Wallace's description of the garden, of its light and peace, had stirred something within me. It was not only his longing, but my own. Had I too not known moments in childhood where the world seemed touched by enchantment? When a turn of a street or the glint of light on a wall hinted at a mystery just beyond reach? Who among us has not felt, if only for an instant, that some secret door might open if only we had the courage to seek it? Thus I sat, torn between belief and disbelief, petty and unease. For Wallace's confession had left me with more questions than answers. If what he said was true, then he had glimpsed a world beyond our own, a place where happiness and innocence lived undimmed.
And if it was false, then it was the tragic delusion of a man whose success had not freed him from the hunger of the soul. At last Wallace stirred. He looked at me with a weary smile, as if to say, "You doubt me, as all men must, but I have spoken my truth." And though I could not bring myself to either voice faith or skepticism, I clasped his hand and held it. He pressed mine firmly, and there was in that gesture something of farewell, though I did not know it at the time. That night, after he left me, I sat long by the dying fire. I tried to rid myself of the spell his story had cast, tried to dismiss it as the fancy of an overburdened mind. But the image of the green door would not leave me. It lingered, as vivid as though I had seen it with my own eyes. And I confess, I felt for the first time a tremor of fear. For whether the door was real or imagined, I could not escape the thought that Wallace's fate was bound up with it. And in that thought lay a foreboding I could not explain.
Chapter 10. The Tragic End. The days that followed Wallace's confession were heavy with unease. I found myself thinking of him constantly, haunted by the vivid images he had left in my mind. The white wall, the green door, the golden garden beyond. I told myself it was only a memory, only a story. Yet a shadow lingered, a sense that his life and that door were bound together in ways I could not understand. It was not long before news reached me that made my blood run cold. Wallace had fallen, and tragically so, into a construction pit near the edge of the city. He was found lifeless, his body bruised and broken. The circumstances were mundane enough, the kind of accident that might befall any man hurrying through London streets. But I could not think it mundane, not after what he had told me. I went to the site, though I scarcely knew why. The pit was narrow and surrounded by scaffolding, and workers were busy clearing debris. And there, on the edge, was a section of wall, stark and white, just as Wallace had described. I looked carefully, but the green door was gone. Perhaps it had never been there at all. Perhaps it had only been Wallace's hope, his longing, a fragment of childhood magic that had followed him into a world too cruel to sustain it. And yet, I could not shake the idea that he had been chasing the door one last time, that in his final moments he had glimpsed it again, and in an irresistible impulse had sought to enter. Perhaps he had succeeded, in some way, and we are left only with the world's version of events. Or perhaps he had fallen, as he had always feared, trapped between the life he led and the world he had glimpsed as a boy. I cannot say which it was. All I know is that the story he told me, the story of the garden, the door, the fleeting paradise, had been no mere tale. It was the truth of his heart, the truest thing he had ever possessed. And in that truth lay both wonder and sorrow. As I walked away from the pit that day, I felt the lingering pull of that green door in my mind, as though it were a living thing, waiting for someone brave enough to enter. I thought of Wallace, of the life he might have had, and of the happiness he sought and never quite attained. And I realized that the door in the wall is more than a story. It is a symbol, the promise of joy beyond the grayness of duty, of wonder beyond the harshness of the world, of the infinite possibility that life holds if only one has courage to step through. And so the tale ends, Redmond reflected, in ambiguity. We may never know whether Wallace truly entered that garden one last time, or whether it remained forever a dream. But perhaps that is the nature of such doors. They are not merely things to be found, but things to be remembered, longed for, and cherished. For those who have glimpsed the extraordinary, for those who have felt the gentle hand of a world beyond the ordinary, the door is never truly gone. It waits, it calls, and perhaps one day someone will answer.